Welcome to the More Than English podcast, where we discuss fascinating and influential ideas, learning English along the way. Here we learn more than English.
The second cultural dimension, according to Hall, is about space. And this is where the term proxemics comes in. And regarding space, just like we have high and low context cultures, also some cultures are comfortable with close proximity and others not so much. So again, we can take the Netherlands as an example of a culture which likes its space. And I can say, as a British person, we're also more or less like this. So that means if you're meeting, let's say you're talking to a colleague or you're talking to maybe a stranger in the street, how much distance is there between you two? So think about that in your own culture. If you're talking to someone in the street or maybe a colleague in the office, how much distance is there between you two? Is it half a meter? Is it a meter? Is it 2 meters? Well, in cultures like Netherlands and to an extent the UK, we like our personal space. So that means if you're talking to a stranger on the street and they're just half a meter away from you, maybe you will feel, these people in these cultures maybe will feel threatened by this person. Maybe they will think this person's even being a bit aggressive. Like, why are they in my personal space? Why are they so close to me? Why are they in my ear? Even if they're with a friend, not just a stranger, maybe a Dutch person or a British person would like to keep a distance, maybe a meter away, just because they feel more comfortable having like a meter radius around them where nobody can touch them. Whereas in maybe another culture like Spain or even more, let's say Arabic cultures like Saudi Arabia, having a conversation, or let's say you're at work, or let's say it's a stranger on the street, having a conversation where the people are in close proximity, meaning if you put out your arm and you can touch them, well, we could say this is like having less personal space. But for these cultures, that's no problem. There's no ill will, there's no perceived threat, but rather it's seen as more a friendly gesture, that I can be just a half a meter away from you, and that shows that you can trust me, maybe that we're friends, that even if it's a stranger, right, not really friends, but that we can talk together in a friendly way and share this space together. Whereas for other cultures, being too close to somebody else might be a form of aggression or a threat. So this is very important to know. If let's say you're from the Netherlands and you are traveling to Spain, if a stranger's talking to you and they're almost in your face, maybe it's not because they are threatening or aggressive, but just they're friendly. The final dimension that Hall talks about is about time. Specifically, he talks about monochronic versus polychronic cultures. So what does this mean? Well, as you might know from these words mono and poly, mono means one, poly means more than one, right? So a monochronic culture means that they like to do things one by one. So let's say they have a to-do list for the day. How are they going to complete these tasks? Well, they will probably do it in an orderly manner. And I think the German culture is a good example of this. The UK to some extent, but Germany for sure. So, again, when we're talking about culture, it's not about everybody in a culture, but rather the norm. So for Germans, on average, they like to do things in a methodical manner. They have a to-do list, they have 5 things to do. So they will start with the first one, and they will not start the second one until they have completed the first. Okay? Another example of monochronic cultures is how they make appointments. So for cultures like Germany or Switzerland, maybe you've heard there's a stereotype about Swiss people that they are always on time, right? So for monochronic cultures, time is important. It's important to be on time, okay? So not only that we do things in a methodical way, step by step, but also that we plan the time to do something and we stick to it, okay? So we have these things to do. Okay, I need to do the laundry, and then I'm going to cook dinner, and then I'm going to meet John. And I told John I'll be ready at 4, so I will be ready at 4. Or let's say I'm having a party tonight, and I told people it starts at 8. So I expect people to come an A or maybe half A, maybe 9, right? But in more polychronic cultures like Spain, again, we can talk about time is more flexible. Everything's more flexible. So let's say we have 5 things to do. I have to do the laundry, I have to make dinner, I have to call my friend. Well, I might be doing the laundry while calling my friend, while making eggs all at the same time. Okay, so for polychronic cultures, time is more flexible. That doesn't just mean, like, well, we just gave the example. That could mean about multitasking, like you have some things to do and you do a bit of this task and then you stop and you do that task and stop, and you kind of go from task to task until they're all done, rather than doing only one task until it's finished and then moving on. And this could also mean when we're talking about appointments. So Spanish culture, and Italians also, it's quite famous that if you go to a party in Spain or Italy and they tell you to come at 8, do not go at 8. It will be a big mistake. Because, and we can talk about context again here, right? If an Italian tells you they're having a party and it starts at 8, they don't really mean it starts at 8, right? So you cannot take what they say at face value, because Italians are a high context culture, okay? Also, if you're meeting an Italian friend and they say, let's meet at 4, it's probably good to message them at 3 and 3:30 or something like that and double check, because time's flexible, right? 4 doesn't always mean 4. Okay, another example which I find interesting, not just Spanish culture, but Hispanic culture, in Latin American culture, South American culture as well, is the word ahora. So the word now in Spanish. So this is fun. For me, this is funny. When a Spanish speaker says ahora, when they say now, like let's go now, vamos ahora. For me, an English person, let's go now means right now. Let's go. We're going right now. But ahora, for a Spanish speaker, could mean in 20 minutes. So this blew my mind when I realized this. And in English, it just doesn't work like that, right? Maybe because we're more of a monochronic culture. Okay, so that's the last point about time. For monochronic cultures, when you say now, it usually means right now. But for, let's say, Italians or Spanish-speaking countries, now could mean now, it could mean 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And this is just a great example of how time is so flexible in polychronic time cultures. I would recommend here pausing the video to take a look at some of these explanations, some of these differences, and I would like you to think, first of all, what is your culture? When I say your culture, I'm talking about your nation or maybe your town. So think about your family, think about where you're from. Would you say it's more of a high context or low context culture, and why, based on this information here? And similarly, would you say it's more monochronic or polychronic? Second of all, I would like you to think about yourself, not just where you're from or your culture, but you personally. Do you fit the culture of where you're from? Let's say you're from Spain, which many people would call a high context and polychronic culture. As a Spanish person, would you say you are also a high context and polychronic kind of person? Or do you differentiate yourself a little bit in some cases? I think this is very interesting to test, because just because you're Spanish or just because I'm British, etc., doesn't mean we have to follow all of the cultural norms of our country. Maybe it's the case, maybe it's not. Nevertheless, let me know what you think. How is your culture, and do you fit this cultural stereotype, or do you differ? And if you differ, where?
That concludes today's episode, which was part 2 looking at Hall's cultural dimensions. In this episode, we looked at the last 2 of his dimensions, which were proxemics, related to space, and monochronic versus polychronic cultures, related to time. In the last episode, part 1, we looked at the other dimension, which was high versus low context cultures. If you haven't seen that episode already, I strongly recommend it. In the next episode and future episodes, we will start our exploration of Gert Hofstadter's cultural dimensions, which will be focused on for several weeks. And now let me leave you with a quote from Terence McKenna. As the bonfires of knowledge grow brighter, the more the darkness is revealed to our startled eyes. And finally, here's today's key vocabulary. Proximity, the state of being near in space or time, closeness. To be in one's ear, to influence someone through close communication. Ill will, unfriendly feelings in which you do not wish good things for others. Methodical, to do something in a very ordered, careful way. And finally, to double check, to confirm or ensure that something is correct or safe. Thanks guys, see you next time.